Russian President Vladimir Putin has suggested that the United Nations govern Ukraine temporarily in order to reach a peace settlement. The White House has dismissed the idea. The week also saw Russia and Ukraine holding separate talks with US officials in Saudi Arabia to hammer out a truce in the Black Sea. Ukraine agreed, but Russia then said it will only comply when sanctions are lifted on Russian banks, something the EU is likely to block. For more, we're now joined by former US Ambassador to NATO, Doug Lute. Ambassador Lute, thanks very much indeed for joining us here on Washington Watch. Ambassador Lute, President Putin now wants the UN governing Ukraine, at least temporarily, till elections are held in Ukraine. He pointed out to arrangements seen in East Timor and parts of the former Yugoslavia. Your thoughts?
Well, look, Ukraine is governed today by a sovereign, duly elected government, democratically elected government, and it's not in a position to be replaced by anybody, not by a proxy government sponsored by Russia or not by an international body. So the people of Ukraine have made a sovereign decision. And that has resulted in the democratically elected Zelensky government. So there's not a role for governance here by the United Nations in Ukraine.
What about talk that Zelensky has passed his term?
Well, look, the Ukrainian constitution allows for martial law, which has been instituted by the parliament in Ukraine. And during martial law, according to the Ukrainian constitution, elections are suspended. So for now, during martial law, the constitution is being upheld. And by the way, Zelensky has something like 75% favorability ratings among the people in Ukraine. So this is not a matter. This is not a matter of who governs Ukraine. The Ukrainian people have spoken.
Now, 2 weeks ago, there was much excitement about the US and Ukraine proposing a 30-day ceasefire, but then Russia said, no, it's just about stopping those attacks on energy infrastructure. Now, this week, we heard about the Black Sea truce, but Russia put conditions there too. Russia clearly dragging its feet. What do you make of Russia's strategy here?
Well, I think Putin is playing for time. I mean, this is, we all have to remember where this began more than 3 years ago with an unprovoked Russian invasion of a sovereign neighbor, Ukraine. And now 3 years later, as there's an attempt, at least an early attempt by the Trump administration to bring the parties into negotiation and perhaps leading to a settlement, there's a strange imbalance that's developed. So on the one hand, Ukraine and the United States agree on a comprehensive ceasefire. When that position is taken to Russia, Russia narrows that and places conditions on a ceasefire. So only in the air or only at sea, for example. And yet the imbalance is represented by concessions being considered for Russia. So Russia, the aggressor, and Russia, the impediment to an agreed ceasefire. So there's an imbalance, a disparity here that's beginning to become prominent in these talks.
Ambassador Lute, at some level, Putin surely knows that Trump's current warmth may change on a dime, really, here. So how much patience do you think US President Trump has with Putin?
Well, I'm concerned that patience is not a virtue in this current setting, in this current White House, and I think undoubtedly President Putin understands that. So if he is in fact playing for time, as he imposes roadblocks or uncertainties or impediments to agreement, the timeline will extend, and I think the White House will become impatient.
All right. In a recent interview, Steve Witkoff, Trump's special negotiator on Ukraine, when asked if Putin wants to overrun Europe, said 100% Putin doesn't want to. Witkoff certainly doesn't have his head in the sand, you can argue. So why is he saying this? Do you think he's pandering to Putin? What's happening here?
Well, look, Putin may not want to overrun Europe in conventional military terms. That is, with tank armies and air attacks and attacks at sea and so forth. But it is undoubtedly a Kremlin objective to divide Europe from Ukraine, to divide Europe internally, and to divide Europe from the United States. That is a long-standing Russian foreign policy objective. In fact, you might argue it's at the top priority for the Kremlin. So you don't need to do these divisions with military means, if he can do it politically. And arguably, if you look at over the last couple of weeks, the divisions that have arisen within Europe and between Europe and Washington, you can argue that Putin's seeing some progress towards this objective.
Ambassador Lute, now Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife Usha Vance are in Greenland this weekend. Before Vance set off for his trip, President Trump has reiterated his stance that the U.S. is going to have Greenland. You've served in the U.S. Army as Lieutenant General. What would you make of Trump's repeated claim that Greenland is key to U.S. national security?
Well, this again is another sort of peculiar dimension of Trump foreign policy. I mean, first of all, to give the Trump administration credit, Greenland is an important geographic entity, geographically because it borders the Arctic, and Arctic sea lanes and so forth are increasingly important. Greenland's important because of the prominence of critical minerals that are potentially an economic asset in Greenland. Greenland sits astride the North Atlantic sea lanes. So look, there's no denying the strategic importance of Greenland, but there's also no denying that Greenland is sovereign territory, sovereign to the Greenlanders, and sovereign by way of constitution to the NATO ally, Denmark. So this is not a question of sovereignty is a question of sovereignty being potentially denied if somehow strong arm tactics were applied to Greenland. And what's curious about this is that Greenland remains open today to increased support, increased military presence by the United States. There's a military base there now. Greenland remains open to that. Greenland remains open to increased economic ties.
Indeed.
So Trump can get much of what he wants if he just cooperates rather than antagonizes.
Doug Lute, thank you so very much for joining us here on Washington Watch.